Sometimes the person everyone blames is the only reason a child gets to smile again. No one in the crowded courtyard knew they were about to witness a moment that would change far more than a single afternoon. Sterling Biotech's annual Family Day had always been designed to soften the sharp edges of corporate life. White tents stretched across the green lawn behind the glass headquarters. Children laughed beneath colorful balloons, and music drifted through the warm spring air while employees tried, if only for a few hours, to forget deadlines and quarterly reports. Marcus Brooks stood near the maintenance station with a small toolbox resting at his feet, quietly checking the last safety barrier surrounding the inflatable play area. He wasn't dressed like the executives posing for photographs near the stage. His Navy maintenance shirt carried faint signs of honest work. His company badge hung neatly over his chest, and the sleeves rolled just above his wrists revealed years of labor rather than privilege. To most people walking past, he was simply another employee whose name would be forgotten before sunset. Marcus didn't seem to mind. He had long ago learned that dignity didn't need applause. It only needed consistency. A few yards away, 7-year-old Maya Brooks sat beneath a shade tree with a paperback science book balanced on her knees. Every few minutes she looked toward her father, and every single time Marcus answered with the same reassuring smile before returning to work. It had become their silent language over the years. One glance meant, "I'm here." One smile meant, "I know." Across the lawn, another little girl wandered away from the activity tables without anyone noticing. Emily Sterling, the CEO's 8-year-old daughter, had slipped away chasing the bright ribbon tied to a drifting balloon. She moved farther from the crowd with every curious step, completely unaware that she was approaching an area where temporary equipment was still being repositioned by contractors preparing the afternoon demonstration. Marcus noticed her before anyone else did, not because he was looking for trouble, but because paying attention had become second nature after years of raising a child on his own. He looked from Maya to the little girl, then toward the workers whose attention had shifted elsewhere. Something didn't feel right. His heartbeat remained calm even as his instincts quietly urged him forward. He set the wrench on the ground and began walking, not running, careful not to frighten the child. Emily reached the edge of the restricted space just as a lightweight display frame, loosened by an unexpected gust of wind, began tipping in her direction. It wasn't heavy enough to cause serious harm, but it was more than enough to frighten a small child. Before anyone else understood what was happening, Marcus closed the distance, gently lifted Emily into his arms, and stepped clear as the display settled harmlessly onto the grass beside them, with a dull rustle that silenced nearby conversations. Emily clung to his shoulder for one frightened breath before looking into his face. Marcus smiled with the quiet patience fathers learn through countless ordinary days. "You're okay, sweetheart," he said softly. "You're safe now." For one suspended moment, the entire celebration seemed to stop. Heads turned, conversations faded, cameras lowered. No one realized that within the next few minutes, the man who had just protected the CEO's daughter would become the easiest person in the company to blame. Emily wrapped both small arms around Marcus's neck, her breathing already steady again, while he carefully lowered her back onto the grass, a safe distance from the display frame. She looked up at him with wide blue eyes that still carried the surprise of the moment. "Thank you, mister," she whispered. Marcus smiled gently and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face, without crossing the quiet boundaries of respect that came naturally to him. "You are very brave," he said. "Let us find your mom." Before Emily could answer, hurried footsteps echoed across the lawn. Security officers rushed toward them, followed by event managers speaking over one another, with rising panic. None of them had seen the beginning of what happened. They had only arrived to find the company's maintenance supervisor standing beside the chief executive officer's daughter, while employees crowded around the restricted area. "Step away from the child," one security supervisor ordered, his voice firm but controlled. Marcus immediately took 2 calm steps backward and lifted both open hands. "She is fine," he answered quietly. "Please make sure she stays hydrated. She was frightened, that is all." Emily reached toward him again. "No, he helped me." Her small voice struggled to rise above the confusion, but almost no one heard her. At that exact moment, a black luxury sedan stopped beside the main entrance. Victoria Sterling stepped out before the driver could open her door completely. Her tailored white suit reflected the afternoon sunlight, but her expression carried only urgency. She had been delayed in a board meeting across town, and had arrived just as 3 different phone calls reported that something had happened involving her daughter. She walked quickly across the lawn, her heels striking the stone pathway with measured confidence that caused conversations to stop wherever she passed. Every employee instinctively moved aside. Victoria's eyes searched the crowd until they found Emily standing near the security officers. Relief washed across her face for only a fraction of a second before concern returned. She knelt beside her daughter. "Emily, sweetheart, are you hurt?" Emily shook her head. "I am okay." But before she could explain, another voice interrupted. Daniel Cross, the event operations director, stepped forward with visible anxiety. His department had approved the temporary display installation, and one serious question about safety could end his career. "Miss Sterling," he said quickly, "we are still gathering the facts, but this employee entered the restricted area during the incident." His finger pointed directly toward Marcus. Victoria slowly stood. Her eyes shifted to the maintenance uniform, the company badge, and the gathering crowd watching every movement. Years of leading a multi-billion-dollar company had trained her to make immediate decisions when uncertainty threatened order. From where she stood, Marcus appeared to be the center of the disturbance. She noticed the fallen display. She noticed frightened employees. She noticed security surrounding him. What she did not notice was the quiet gratitude still shining in her daughter's eyes every time she looked toward Marcus. Marcus remained perfectly still. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He simply met Victoria's gaze with calm respect, unaware that the next few words spoken by someone else would begin unraveling everything he had spent years quietly building. Daniel Cross cleared his throat, eager to fill the dangerous silence before anyone else could speak. "Miss Sterling, several employees reported that Mr. Brooks crossed the safety boundary during the incident. We are still collecting statements, but he was inside an area that had been marked for authorized personnel only." His words sounded measured, responsible, almost reasonable. That was what made them believable. Victoria's expression remained unreadable. Years in corporate leadership had taught her that hesitation often invited confusion, and confusion spread faster than truth. She glanced once more toward the fallen display, then toward the dozens of employees watching every movement. Cameras from company phones were already pointed in their direction. Family Day had quietly transformed into a public test of leadership. Emily tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she began, but Victoria placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder without taking her eyes off Marcus. "Sweetheart, give me 1 minute." Marcus stood with his hands resting naturally at his sides. There was no fear in his face, only patience. He had spent enough years being misunderstood to recognize the familiar silence before judgment arrived. Victoria stepped closer. "Mr. Brooks," she said evenly, "did you enter the restricted area?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Yes, ma'am." Daniel Cross immediately nodded, as if the matter had been settled. A few people in the crowd quietly exchanged looks. Victoria continued. "Were you authorized to be there?" Marcus looked briefly toward Emily, before returning his attention to the chief executive officer. "No, ma'am." Another murmur moved through the employees. The simple answers sounded like admissions, stripped of every important detail that had led to them. Victoria folded her hands in front of her. "Sterling Biotech has strict safety protocols. Every employee is expected to follow them without exception. Those standards exist to protect everyone on this property." Marcus listened without interrupting. Emily tried again. "Mom, This time one of the event coordinators gently guided the little girl a few steps away, believing the adults needed space to handle the situation. Marcus noticed Emily looking back at him with worried eyes. He answered with the same calm smile he had given Maya beneath the tree only minutes earlier. It was enough to reassure the child, even if no one else understood why. Victoria inhaled slowly. "Effective immediately, your employment with Sterling Biotech is terminated." The words landed across the courtyard with startling clarity. The music had already stopped. Even the children nearby seemed to sense that something important had just happened. Marcus lowered his eyes for only a moment. Not in defeat, simply to collect himself. Then he unclipped his identification badge from his shirt with careful fingers. The plastic card had been with him for nearly 6 years. He brushed away an invisible speck of dust before holding it respectfully in both hands. "Very well, ma'am," he said softly. He took one step forward and placed the badge into Daniel Cross's waiting hand, instead of forcing Victoria to reach for it herself. His voice remained steady. "May I ask one question before I leave?" Victoria gave a brief nod. Marcus looked past the executives toward Emily. Is your daughter breathing comfortably now? The question caught several employees off guard. Victoria turned instinctively toward her daughter, who smiled and nodded. Yes, Mom. I am okay because... Before she could finish, Marcus offered one last polite smile, picked up his worn toolbox, and quietly walked away through a crowd that had already decided it knew his story. While behind him, more than one employee began wondering why a guilty man had been far more concerned about a little girl's well-being than about losing the job that supported his own daughter. Marcus did not look back as he crossed the parking lot with his toolbox hanging from one hand and Maya quietly matching his pace beside him. The afternoon sun still warmed the pavement, but the laughter from Family Day faded behind them with every step. Maya waited until they reached his aging pickup truck before slipping her small hand into his. She had watched enough of life to know that silence sometimes protected people more than words ever could. Marcus opened the passenger door for her first, waited until she fastened her seatbelt, then walked around to the driver's side. The engine started on the second attempt, just as it always did. Nothing inside the truck had changed. The faded baseball cap still rested on the dashboard. The family photo clipped beside the visor still showed Maya missing her front teeth from 2 years earlier. Only one thing was different. Marcus no longer had a place to drive back to on Monday morning. During the ride home, Maya watched neighborhoods drift past the window. Children rode bicycles along quiet sidewalks. Families unloaded groceries. The ordinary rhythm of the city continued, as though nothing important had happened. Finally, she spoke. Daddy? Marcus kept his eyes on the road. Yes, Pumpkin? She hesitated. Did you lose your job again? The question floated gently through the truck, carrying no judgment, only concern. Marcus smiled, the same calm smile that had comforted frightened children more than once in his life. Looks like I will have a little extra time with my favorite girl for a while. Maya looked down at her backpack. Was it because of today? Marcus waited a moment before answering. Sometimes people have to make decisions before they know the whole story. She slowly nodded, as though trying to understand something much larger than her 8 years could explain. But you helped that little girl. Marcus rested one hand lightly on the steering wheel. Helping someone is still the right thing to do, even if nobody claps afterward. The truck turned into their apartment complex on the east side of town. The building was modest but clean, with flower boxes beneath several windows and bicycles leaning against the fence. Their upstairs apartment smelled faintly of fresh laundry and cinnamon from the neighbor downstairs who baked almost every afternoon. Maya dropped her backpack beside the kitchen table, while Marcus placed his toolbox in the hallway closet, exactly where it always belonged. Routine had become his quiet way of reminding himself that difficult days did not have permission to change who he was. Maya disappeared into her room and returned a minute later, carrying a small glass jar decorated with bright stickers. She set it carefully on the kitchen counter. Emergency cookie money, she announced with complete seriousness. Marcus looked inside. Crumpled $1 bills, loose quarters, and a few shiny dimes filled the bottom. He laughed softly despite the weight pressing against his chest. Where did this come from? Maya shrugged. I have been saving my birthday money. We can use it until you get another job. Marcus knelt beside her and gently closed the lid. No, sweetheart. That money belongs to your dreams. She tilted her head. What if my dream is helping you? For just a second he could not answer. Instead, he wrapped her in a quiet hug, grateful that the richest part of his life had never depended on the badge he left behind that afternoon. Even as somewhere across the city, another family unknowingly held the first piece of the truth that would soon change everything. The next morning began with quiet rain tapping against the wide windows of Sterling Biotech's executive floor. Victoria Sterling stood alone in the conference room, long before the first directors arrived, her untouched coffee cooling beside a stack of financial reports she could not bring herself to read. Something about yesterday refused to leave her mind. It was not the incident itself. It was the expression on Marcus Brooks's face after she dismissed him. There had been disappointment, certainly, but not anger. He had accepted the decision with a calmness that felt strangely unsettling. Most employees argued. Some pleaded. Others threatened legal action. He had asked only one question. Was her daughter breathing comfortably now? Victoria looked out across the city skyline before pressing the intercom. Please send me yesterday's security footage from Family Day, she said. Within minutes, the files arrived from the facilities department. She intended only to document the sequence of events for legal purposes before moving on with her schedule. Instead, she found herself pressing play. The first camera overlooked the lawn from the rooftop. Children ran between activity stations, while employees laughed beneath white tents. She watched Emily drift away from the crowd. No one noticed. Not the event staff, not security, not the contractors. Then a single figure changed direction. Marcus. He was not rushing toward trouble. He was quietly walking toward a child no one else had realized was alone. Victoria leaned closer. A second camera revealed another angle. The temporary display frame shifted unexpectedly in the wind. Before any nearby employee reacted, Marcus reached Emily, lifted her away from the equipment, and stepped into open space where both of them remained completely safe. There was no panic, no recklessness, only quick judgment followed by remarkable composure. Victoria paused the recording. Her fingers remained motionless above the keyboard. She replayed the scene once, then again. Every viewing erased another piece of the story she thought she knew. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Emily stepped into the office carrying her favorite sketchbook beneath one arm. "Mom?" Victoria smiled faintly. "Come here, sweetheart." Emily climbed onto the chair beside her. The video remained frozen on the screen. As soon as Emily saw the image, her face brightened. She pointed immediately. "That is Mr. Marcus." Victoria looked at her daughter. "Can you tell me exactly what happened yesterday?" Emily answered without hesitation. "I followed my balloon. I was scared because something started falling. Mr. Marcus picked me up and told me everything was okay. He smiled the whole time." Victoria felt her heartbeat slow. "Did anyone tell him to help you?" Emily shook her head. "No, everybody else came later." The room became painfully quiet. Emily tilted her head with innocent confusion. "Why did he leave after you talked to him?" Victoria could not answer. Before she found the words, another notification appeared on her computer. It was an incident report from the company nurse. Attached was a brief statement from 2 maintenance workers and 1 security officer, all confirming that Marcus Brooks had reached Emily before anyone else and had acted with exceptional professionalism throughout the entire incident. Victoria stared at the screen without blinking. One report could be mistaken. 3 independent accounts could not. Somewhere between assumptions and authority, she had dismissed the one employee who had done exactly what every parent hoped another human being would do for their child. Victoria remained seated long after Emily skipped out of the office, the silence growing heavier with every passing second. The city stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, busy as always, but for the first time in years, she barely noticed it. Her attention stayed fixed on the frozen image of Marcus Brooks carrying her daughter to safety with a calm expression that now seemed impossible to forget. She replayed the recording one final time, slower than before. Every frame revealed details she had ignored the previous afternoon. He had not run recklessly. He had not created chaos. He had checked the surroundings before moving. He had shielded Emily with his own body, without making a spectacle of himself. Even after placing her safely on the grass, he had stepped back to give others room, instead of demanding recognition. Victoria quietly closed her eyes. The memory of his final question echoed through her mind with painful clarity. "Is your daughter breathing comfortably now?" He had not asked for his job. He had not defended his reputation. He had only asked about Emily. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her executive assistant entered carrying a thin personnel folder. "You asked for Mr. Brooks's employee file." Victoria accepted it with a simple nod. She expected an ordinary employment record. Instead, she found 6 years of consistently outstanding performance reviews. Every supervisor described the same qualities: reliable, patient, honest, exceptional under pressure. One evaluation noted that Marcus had once stayed through an entire winter night repairing the building heating system, so employees arriving the next morning would not lose a day of work. Another described how he quietly organized holiday gifts for children whose parents worked overnight shifts. None of those actions had been submitted for company awards because Marcus himself had requested they remain anonymous. Victoria turned another page. There was a handwritten note from the Human Resources Director dated 3 years earlier. Employee declined public recognition, requested that budget allocated for his award be redirected toward Employee Family Assistance Fund. Victoria slowly lowered the folder onto her desk. The room suddenly felt much larger than before. Success had taught her how to evaluate numbers, negotiate billion-dollar contracts, and identify business risks within minutes. Yet somehow, she had failed the simplest test of leadership. She had judged a man's character before understanding his actions. That realization settled heavily across her shoulders. Later that afternoon, she found Emily sitting in the company garden drawing pictures with colored pencils. Victoria sat beside her without saying anything at first. They watched butterflies drift across the flowers, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh roses through the courtyard. Finally, Emily looked up. "Mom, is Mr. Marcus coming back?" Victoria struggled to answer honestly. "I do not know yet, sweetheart." Emily looked disappointed. She held up her drawing. It showed two smiling stick figures, holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. One was labeled Emily. The other simply read, Mr. Marcus. Above them she had written in careful letters, "He helped me because he is kind." Victoria stared at the childish handwriting much longer than necessary. Children often notice truths that adults buried beneath titles and assumptions. She wrapped one arm gently around her daughter. "Emily," she whispered, "sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too." Emily rested her head against her mother's shoulder. "Then you should tell him you are sorry." The innocence of those words pierced deeper than any boardroom criticism ever could. Victoria looked toward the headquarters building, standing tall against the afternoon sky, already knowing that saying the words would be far easier than earning the forgiveness of a man who had walked away with his dignity while she remained behind questioning her own. The following Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and cool spring air. Victoria drove herself for the first time in years, leaving behind the company driver, the security detail, and the carefully managed distance that usually surrounded her life. The small cardboard box resting on the passenger seat contained Marcus Brooks's employee badge, neatly polished after she had found a faint fingerprint still pressed against the plastic. She could have mailed it. She could have asked human resources to make the call. Instead, something inside her insisted that some mistakes could only be faced in person. The apartment complex was quieter than she expected. Children drew colorful chalk pictures along the sidewalk, while neighbors exchanged friendly greetings over morning coffee. It felt like a different world from the polished glass towers downtown. Victoria checked the address one last time before walking toward Building C. She suddenly realized she had rehearsed financial presentations for thousands of investors without ever feeling nervous. Yet standing outside one modest apartment made her hands strangely uncertain. She knocked softly. A few seconds later, the door opened. Marcus stood there wearing a simple gray sweater and faded blue jeans, a dish towel still resting over one shoulder. The smell of fresh pancakes drifted through the doorway. For just a brief moment, both of them remained silent. Marcus looked surprised, but not angry. "Good morning, Miss Sterling," he said politely. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," she answered, her voice quieter than usual. Before either could continue, Maya appeared behind her father, holding a mixing bowl almost as large as her arms. She looked curiously toward the unexpected visitor. Marcus smiled gently. "Maya, would you give us 1 minute?" She nodded obediently before disappearing back toward the kitchen. Victoria noticed children's drawings taped neatly across the refrigerator, and a small bookshelf filled with library books instead of expensive decorations. Everything inside the apartment reflected care rather than wealth. She looked back at Marcus and held out the small box with both hands. "I came to return something that belongs to you." Marcus opened it slowly. His company badge rested inside, exactly as he had left it. He smiled faintly before closing the lid again. "Thank you." Victoria lowered her eyes. "That is not the only reason I came." The breeze moved gently through the open hallway, carrying the distant sound of children laughing outside. For the first time in a very long time, Victoria Sterling found herself speaking without a prepared script. "I watched every security recording. I read every witness statement. Emily told me what happened. I was wrong." Marcus remained quiet. He did not rescue her from the uncomfortable silence. He simply listened. "I judged you before I understood the truth," she continued. "That decision was unfair to you, unfair to my daughter, and unworthy of the leadership I expect from myself. I am deeply sorry." The apology lingered between them without expectation. Marcus looked toward the neighborhood playground for a thoughtful moment before answering. "Thank you for saying that." Victoria searched his face. "I would like to offer you your position back immediately, with full compensation and a public correction." Marcus nodded slowly, appreciating the sincerity behind her words. Then he surprised her once again. "Miss Sterling," he said gently, "a paycheck can replace lost income. A title can replace a job, but dignity is harder to restore. That takes time. Victoria felt the weight of his words settle quietly into her heart, realizing that forgiveness could never be demanded, simply because an apology had finally been spoken. 3 days later, the story reached far beyond the walls of Sterling Biotech. A guest who had attended Family Day uploaded a short video showing the final moments after the incident. It did not reveal the entire truth, but it showed enough to raise difficult questions. Thousands of people watched the clip within hours. Reporters began calling the company, asking why an employee who had clearly carried a frightened child to safety had disappeared from the staff directory the very next day. The communications department struggled to answer questions that grew more uncomfortable with every interview request. Inside headquarters, the atmosphere changed completely. Employees who had remained silent now quietly shared what they had witnessed. Maintenance workers spoke about Marcus staying late whenever someone needed help. Receptionists remembered him carrying heavy deliveries without being asked. Custodians described how he always greeted every person by name, from interns to executives. None of those stories sounded extraordinary by themselves, yet together they painted the portrait of a man whose character had been visible all along. Victoria watched the situation unfold from her office with growing regret. She accepted responsibility during every internal meeting and refused to blame anyone else, including Daniel Cross. The easiest path would have been to sacrifice another employee to protect the company's reputation. Instead, she insisted that leadership meant owning the consequences of her own decisions. Even so, the public criticism continued. Investors questioned the company's culture. Several business partners delayed important meetings until the situation became clearer. Rumors spread that layoffs might follow if confidence continued to fall. Hundreds of ordinary employees quietly worried about mortgages, tuition payments, and medical bills. Across town, Marcus noticed the headlines while helping Maya finish her science project at the kitchen table. She looked up from her notebook. "Everybody is talking about your company." Marcus gently corrected her with a small smile. "It is still their company now." Maya studied his face. "Are you going to help Miss Sterling?" Marcus remained silent for a moment. Through the apartment window, he watched children playing basketball beneath the evening lights. Finally, he answered, "If people lose their jobs because of something I could prevent, then innocent families would carry the cost of a mistake that belongs somewhere else." The next morning, he requested a meeting with Victoria. She expected he had changed his mind about returning to work. Instead, Marcus arrived carrying a folder filled with maintenance reports, safety recommendations, and practical solutions that could restore employee confidence. He had spent the previous nights reviewing old inspection records he had legally kept copies of for personal reference. Several temporary event procedures, including contractor communication, could be improved without blaming individuals. Victoria looked at him with disbelief. "You did all of this after everything that happened?" Marcus folded his hands calmly. "This is not about me. There are thousands of people inside that building who wake up every morning trying to provide for their families. They deserve stability." Victoria felt her throat tighten. Once again, Marcus had quietly chosen compassion over pride. He had every reason to walk away and let the company struggle alone. Instead, he stood before the woman who had wronged him, offering not revenge, but a path that protected people who had never harmed him. In that quiet conference room, Victoria finally understood that true leadership was not measured by authority, but by the rare strength to keep serving others, even after being treated unfairly. 1 week later, every employee of Sterling Biotech received an invitation to an all-hands meeting in the main atrium. Rumors spread through every department before the doors even opened. Some expected another corporate announcement. Others feared another round of difficult decisions. When the gathering began, Victoria Sterling walked onto the stage alone. There were no presentation slides behind her. No polished marketing video. Only a single microphone and a quiet room filled with people waiting for answers. She looked across the faces of engineers, receptionists, custodians, managers, and maintenance workers before taking a slow breath. "Today," she began, "I am not here to celebrate a business achievement. I am here to acknowledge a leadership failure, mine." The room became perfectly still. She described the Family Day incident without excuses. She admitted that she had acted before understanding the truth. She explained how Marcus Brooks had protected Emily, how witness statements and security footage confirmed every detail, and how her own assumptions had led to an unjust decision. No one interrupted. Some employees lowered their eyes, others quietly nodded. When Victoria finished, she stepped down from the stage, instead of remaining above everyone else. She walked through the center aisle until she reached the front row, where Marcus sat beside Maya, who wore her favorite blue dress and held a small library book in her lap. Victoria stopped in front of him. The same employee badge she had returned days earlier rested in her hands. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly enough that the microphone barely carried her voice, "I cannot erase what happened, but I can choose what happens next. On behalf of this company, I ask for another chance to earn the trust I failed to protect." She offered him the badge without expectation. Marcus looked at it for a long moment before gently closing Victoria's fingers around it again. A few people exchanged uncertain glances, wondering if he had refused. Then Marcus smiled with the same quiet warmth that had never left him. "Miss Sterling, I told you that dignity takes time to restore. I believe today is a good place to begin." He accepted the badge only after she placed it into his hand a second time. The applause that followed was unlike the loud celebrations usually heard after quarterly victories. It started with one maintenance worker, then another. Soon the entire atrium stood together, not for a promotion or a financial milestone, but for honesty, humility, and grace. Emily hurried across the floor and wrapped her arms around Marcus while Maya joined them with a bright smile. The two girls laughed together as though they had known each other much longer than a single afternoon. Victoria watched the scene with quiet gratitude, realizing that neither success nor wealth had taught her the lesson standing before her. It had been taught by a father who chose kindness when bitterness would have been easier, by a little girl who believed helping people was more valuable than saving cookie money, and by another child who simply told the truth when everyone else had become distracted by appearances. Months later, employees often said the company culture changed after that day, but Marcus never claimed credit. Every morning, he greeted people with the same calm smile, carried the same worn toolbox through the same hallways, and treated every person with equal respect. Some revolutions arrive with applause. Others begin with one quiet act of kindness that reminds people to see a human being before making a judgment. And that lesson remained the most valuable thing anyone carried home from Sterling Biotech.